Okay, cool, let's kick off. So, yes, the title of the talk is Beyond Copilot, How Developer Tools Are Evolving from Editors to Agents. And this fellow on the left-hand side is me, because I submitted this talk in December. I wrote some notes, and then I threw them away in January because everything changed. And then in February I did the same. And essentially I was, on the plane on the way over and in my hotel room last night, finally, getting together the things that are happening in the industry because, wow, it is moving at pace. So first, before we begin, yes, it's my second time here, and I would just actually take a moment. The Grust people are very kind, very friendly. It was such a nice time last time. The food is amazing, so if we could, for the AV guys as well, just give them a quick round of applause. I'm now trying to convince them to expand into the UK. We'll see how it goes. Yes, so my name is Lou. As Chopo mentioned, I'm a product manager now, and previously platform and software engineer. So going through those iterations of this talk, I actually ended up thinking, should I rename this? Because, man, things have changed. I almost want to change the thesis of the talk. And then I made this slide, which was along the fact that I think, with these changes, that it almost feels like, as an industry, like we're at a really interesting inflection point here where we need to sort of sit up in our chairs and kind of take notice to what's happening in AI. However, I showed this to my girlfriend, and she was like, this is a bit negative. So I decided, let's throw Ralph away. Because in truth, I'm actually much more like this guy on the right. You probably can't see it very well, but this is a post from LinkedIn Lunatics. And actually the most important bits are here, the LinkedIn Lunatics bit. And at the bottom is like, I literally can't sleep. There's too many ideas, too many opportunities. I'm so excited. That's where I'm at personally with regards to AI. Like, I'm very excited about what it does in software engineering. So I wanted the talk to be a bit more positive than negative. But something interesting is going on that I've been observing as I talk to people, and that is essentially this idea that agentic AI is suffering this real big asymmetry problem. And that's that some people, you go online and they're like, oh my God, I am 10 times as productive as ever before, maybe 100 times. And there's a whole bunch of other people saying like, this AI stuff is terrible. Like, it just does not work for me. And it's really interesting why this is happening. I think a lot of people say it's because of hype. I actually don't think so, and I want to talk about that in this talk. I think it's actually an information asymmetry. I think it's what we've been exposed to in terms of tools has shaped our opinions. And things are moving so quickly that because we haven't been exposed to certain tools, we have certain opinions that may be outdated. So I'm hoping today that I can kind of accelerate as many of you through some of this learning curve as possible. So I'm going to try something audacious because it's in the afternoon. I want to plot all of us on this chart, and I want to see where we're all at with regards to AI. So if you could all do me a favor, if you want to stand up, if you're very, very tired, please stay seated. But if you could stand up for me, that would be really great. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go through. Yeah, don't worry, it's okay. You could just raise your hand if you want to, also, if you're very comfortable. Right? What I want to do is, as we go through, I'm going to go through each of these, and I want to see where you're at in terms of what you're thinking about AI. So do you agree with the little stick man along the thing? So if you all put your hands up, let's do this instead, actually. Maybe it's easier. Yeah, and then put your hand down when I get to the man that you identify with the most. I hope this makes sense. Someone can translate to Italian maybe.
Tirate su tutti le mani, ora! Sulle mani!
Okay. So, it's not good enough. Prove to me that this isn't hype. Stick your hand down if that's kind of where you're at. So we've got a few hands going down. You can look at each other as well. It's kind of interesting to see. Who's experimenting with LLMs? So maybe not sure, but playing. A lot of hands going down. Maybe half the room's left. Who's scared? Who's falling down the chasm thinking, man, this is going to take my job? Maybe one? Okay. Who's thinking that maybe we need to change our priorities based on AI because, man, this is quite powerful? Interesting. Still got some. Who's on this side? So engage with and consuming. Okay. Maybe 10, 20% of the room. And it's kind of the same, I suppose, like at the far end. We got some serious crazy AI people. You're going to be on LinkedIn Lunatics next. I'm down here. I'm the crazy AI guy. If you want to throw tomatoes at me because you don't like AI, that's fine. but also throw mozzarella, arancini, you know, let's make it a real meal. So it's been interesting for me to observe, especially, so I've taken these snapshots from inside of my company because these are some of our engineers that work at Gitpod. And I've been watching people slowly come to the aha moment when it comes to AI. It was actually 3 years ago at an offsite, I literally built a website with Cursor. And I stood in front of the company and people were like, this is funny, the product manager, you know, trying to automate the website. And it was clunky for sure. But now it's way closer than ever before. You can literally build prototypes today. But it's been fun watching the engineers, even internally, as they have their own sort of aha moments with AI. So if you look at me and think, okay, you haven't coded in 3 years, like Anton built Thea IDE, and I've watched him slowly convert to AI. Same with Gira. I mean, he's worked at Gitpod doing software engineering for 7 years in Gitpod, and I don't know for how long before. But like, it's crazy to see their perceptions change as they start to play around with tools and they start to realize the power of what AI and software engineering can do. But I'll first start by a clarification. And that is, when I'm talking about AI, I think some of the most cutting edge, most important tools you can play with right now is some of these ones here. But specifically, these tools have evolved such that we used to have like autocomplete and, you know, tab kind of stuff. But I think the most sort of fully sort of powerful version of this today is what I have over here on the right hand side. So the ability to run feedback loops, including linting and terminal access, iterating in a loop, theoretically infinitely, but they put limits because they don't want to spend all of their cloud spend. And ultimately, potentially fully autonomous for as long as it can be correct. And an example of that is, if you use Cursor, that's agent mode, that's cascade, and potentially YOLO mode. Agent mode gives access to your terminal. Cascade is the sort of the interface panel. And then YOLO is literally where you basically say, go for it. Do whatever you want. Come back to me when you're done, which is crazy. It's very, very YOLO. So what I'm going to do is show you a quick demo with Klein. I was going to do you a demo myself and use some of these tools, but then I thought, let's not do that, because very commonly you show these like hello world and people go like, cool, but that's not going to work on a real code base. So I actually want to show you a quick demo of this tool Klein working on our code base, which is a very large one. I just want you to see how that looks. So I'm just going to swap into YouTube for a second. And I'm hopefully going to be able to zoom. Let's see. Because this is quite small. We have a very big screen, but no. Okay. Maybe like this. Okay, there we go. We're making it work. So some of you might be familiar with this kind of interface over here on the left-hand side. Let me go ahead and restart this video. Let's go back, see that from the start. What this is essentially doing, and I'll explain to you how it's doing this a little bit later, is actually rewriting an entire repository, different language. So it's rewriting it from JavaScript into Go. What it's essentially doing in the first stage is actually it's going through and reading a bunch of different files. So because Klein, the extension basically has file system access, it's able to access all of these different files. And what it's doing first is actually just loading its own context, just like you would as an engineer. Go through the file system, understand what different files you might be editing, and understand the application. Once it's got that understanding, it then is able to actually execute on top of the suggested changes. Now this is actually a 20-minute video that actually is this running through and being fully autonomous. I'm going to skip ahead just to sort of some of the more fun parts, let's say. Just zoom out here again. I have another video that's a bit closer in later on in the presentation. But once it's actually gone through and done all that context, it basically comes back and says, hey, cool, I've made a plan, I've looked at all the files, here's what I'm going to do and what I'm going to execute. And then when Gira essentially accepted that, off it goes. Now it's converting this entire integration from JavaScript to Go in near enough like a one-shot. And this runs autonomously for nearly 20 minutes. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and watch this with you. If you want to watch the whole video with me in the hallway, I can play it for you if you want. And this runs through and it's successful. When it gets to the end, it has all of the tests, and towards the end, it even writes the README. And there it goes, right in the README. So this is pretty interesting stuff. And this is on top of an integration, but I'll show you also with our own code base. And this comes back to what I'm saying before. I think some of these tools are evolving so quickly, especially some of this agent mode stuff that has integrations to terminals, that it's leading to this. And I see people online saying this doesn't work with my code base, and other people saying we are seeing profound benefits from AI. And I think over the last couple of months, we've seen some of this sort of agentic features being built into sort of editors and this kind of thing, and it's really increasing the ability and performance of this sort of software AI. Now, we had a conversation even over dinner last night, and I think there's a few reasons why this asymmetry is happening. One is geographical, right? In some of the different centers, I don't know where, it's DeepSeek in China, and it's somewhere in San Francisco with OpenAI. There's obviously a concentration of people that are very close to the metal here in terms of the changes. They're talking about it in cafes and meetups, and then it slowly propagates to the rest of the world. Certainly over here in Europe, I think that there's less awareness around some of these technologies, and we have to be conscious of that. This paper about situational awareness is super interesting as well, because it makes the same point. These folks that are very, very close to this in San Francisco have what they call situational awareness. It's a little bit hypey, but it illustrates the point, which is that they are so close to the innovations that are happening here, they can see what's coming, and they're more situationally aware than the rest of us. Another working theory that I have, and I'm pretty sure it's quite accurate, is that AI is also spreading unevenly across ecosystems. So if you work in front end, you're probably more likely to think that AI is doing great work for you today. There's many reasons for that. It's very fast in terms of time to aha. You can create stuff that's visual. You know, a lot of VC money going into tools like Lovable, V0, Replit. And the models are trained on a lot of public data like React and that kind of thing. And then also in addition to that, the feedback loops are so much easier with something like front end, because it's got access to the file system. When it comes to something like back end, it's harder. It's a systems problem. You have multiple microservices operating over networks. You need to give the agent access to all of that in order to make those tests, to run those feedback loops, to know if the changes that it made are correct. Pretty much the same story for infrastructure as well. I know lots of my friends that are working in infrastructure are like, man, I'm just getting nothing out of AI. Same problem, systems problems. They don't have access to these different components. When you run a Terraform script, CloudFormation, whatever, creates all this infrastructure, you need to test across it. Let's be honest, probably half of us don't even have a test suite that was probably that accurate, even testing our systems at large. So I think that's contribution to the asymmetry. But I think there's another human thing here as well. And this comes from this blog post down here that's called AI or Die. It's pretty strong, I think, in terms, but it's a great blog post that articulates 3 different reasons why potentially that we're seeing that people are not getting the most out of AI today. It's a people issue. One is ambition. Specifically, we're not taking AI seriously enough. We ask it to write poems, we ask it to do silly things, but we don't actually think about AI as actually doing proper work. Like, could this automate some of the serious tasks that we do if we put our mind to it? Now, people have said sort of quite hypey things about like a $1 billion company, a company that has $1 billion valuation ran by one person. I think it's possible. But even if it's not possible, what if we take that mindset and apply it to our own company? What if our company makes it to $1 billion valuation and we try and do it with one person? It's a bit hypothetical, but it implores us to think about what's possible with AI. And can we take this more seriously? Do we need to even restructure our code in order to benefit from this? Why are we sort of expecting AI to, understand our code base and adopt to our systems? Why don't we also think about restructuring our code base so that it works better with AI? Another one is patience. I see people, they go into ChatGPT, they ask it a quick question, they go, this is crap. This doesn't work. We're not spending enough time. AI right now has amnesia. It needs context. It needs a lot of information put into the LLM so that it can understand the world around it. That's changing, but as it stands today, we have to be patient in order to get some of the benefits from AI. I hear a lot of people saying as well that AI is almost giving them brain mush, because they're just like using AI, creating slop and copy pasting. But the thing is, we can engage with AI. We can talk to it. We can ask it to challenge us, and we can learn from it. As I'm sat here listening to the talk, I'm running notes on Granola on my app, and I'm asking it questions. What did this, can you summarize the talk so far? Like, you can ask it questions. What are the main challenges that the speaker highlighted? And you can use this to learn as you're using AI as well. And the final one is clarity of thought. So again, being specific with the AI about what you want it to do. You wouldn't hire a junior developer and then just sort of give them a linear ticket and say, like, go. We had a talk this morning, talk about 3 months? 3-month boot camps we spend on real people to give them context about our companies. Yet with AI, we give it, sort of a Jira ticket and hope that it could do its best. But that's enough about the asymmetry for a second. I did say that I would talk about code assistants and editors and agents. So I think most of us have probably seen code assistants, and we saw a little bit of editors here as well. But there's this whole thing about agents. Everyone's losing their mind over AI agents, so let's talk about that. 2 weeks back, I was in New York for the AI Engineer Summit, and basically OpenAI, this is their definition of agents. Every talk there was people trying to define agents, so maybe don't try and worry about this too much, but this is their definition, which is essentially a model, access to an LLM, doesn't matter, Sonnet, one of the OpenAI ones, instructions or a prompt, tools, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I'll be specific about what tools mean, and then runtime. Where does it run? On your machine, in the cloud? It has to run somewhere. But in a simple terms, and something that certainly I understand more, is that agents are really just LLMs in a loop. Like, they're kind of smart on their own, but if you run them in a loop over and over and you start asking them to iterate on their own thinking, they actually get so much more performant. We don't need any more model performance for that. Just run it in an iteration. Now, I know certainly for a lot of people, when you talk about agents, you show them the definition, it's like, oh, show me some code. I can't conceptualize this. So there's a ton of agent frameworks out there. It's really crazy. I mean, you'll waste a lot of time. I think one of the speakers talking about wasting time on, sort of, do you go deep on this? Be careful, you'll spend a lot of time looking into agent frameworks. But this is one from Crew AI. Effectively, the syntax is you define agents kind of like people. I'm not jazzed about the people sort of personification of agents. I think it's better to think about LLMs doing tasks than like whole roles. But like in this case, researcher, an analyst, a writer, you define tasks for those individual roles. And then at the bottom, basically, you run a crew, like a team of agents. In this case, it's a sequential pipeline. Does a thing, passes it to next task onwards, and that's what it does. But there's different patterns. You can have sort of governing agents that control and orchestrate and manage other agents. It gets a bit complex. But in principle, that's all it is. When we built our first agent in-house, it was, I think, several hundred lines of code. So you don't actually need agent frameworks. You can literally just run an LLM in a loop if you want, and that's a version of an agent if you want. And like I say, this has to go on some form of runtime. So the OpenAI, like 2 days ago, released their agents SDK. It was like 2 days ago. I still haven't caught up with it. It's in the slide deck. I don't know what it does, but it's launched. Gitpod, we have our own software engineering specific agent SDK. Cloudflare have one, and we start to see these sort of runtimes for agents popping up as well. So, in my challenge of sort of pulling together this talk, I started to think about how do we talk about agents? Everything's changing. So what I want to talk about is actually the challenges with agents. And this is probably more on the vendor side, but if you want to go home and start playing with agents yourself, you'll run across some of these different challenges. The challenges won't change so much, but the solutions and the tools certainly will. The first big challenge is around reliability and trust. So if I give this YOLO mode and let it do whatever it wants, how do I constrain that? How do I put guardrails around my agent so that it doesn't do things that I don't want it to? We don't yet have the tooling and the infrastructure in order to do this today, but it's certainly a big problem. Context and memory. LLMs have amnesia. They have no memory when you start off working with them. So you need to feed context. You need to feed documents from your company, the tasks that you want to do. And second to that is memory. We're starting to see tools now adding the idea of memory, so LLMs can remember stuff between chats. So they don't have amnesia, they actually can remember stuff. However, it's an incredibly hard problem domain to know how to store stuff. The human brain is amazing at selectively forgetting unimportant information. It's like a great feature. Trying to do that into systems, I mean, that's quite a complex challenge. Tool use and integration. A lot of people don't realize this, but LMs can actually call tools. They can call out to other integrations and they can actually fetch things. Just like we saw there with Klein making reads to a file system, you can actually patch in an LLM using tools into actually anything. They can, as long as they're authenticated and they have access to it and you describe that tool use, they can make requests to anything. And the last one, potentially even the biggest one, is evaluation. Generative AI is generative. It makes things up, it hallucinates. That's kind of the best thing about it and the worst thing about it. So if you want to build something for like a financial application and you need 100% certainty that this LLM is not going to do something wild, it's very hard today. In fact, this is probably the hardest problem in agents in general, is getting them to be more deterministic when they're fundamentally not deterministic. So let's dig into this. I had a conversation even just about an hour ago. One thing that's metaphor that's very clarifying for me thinking about agents and autonomy is this idea of time to disengagement. And this is a metric used in autonomous vehicles to measure the success of a autonomous car. Can it drive down the road without you grabbing the wheel? Sweet. Can it drive down the street without grabbing the wheel? That's another step change. Can it drive across the state? Can it drive to the airport in San Francisco? We're seeing the same happening also in software. How far can these agents go, and what does that mean for our UX? So right now, when we think about this kind of like tab, tab, tab auto-completion, that's kind of measured in seconds. What I've shown you even just a second ago, 20 minutes long autonomy, and we start to get into the cracks start to show, where having this UX inside of our editor, is this the right UX anymore? It's kind of hard to say. I know people now that are running multiple agents in the background. They're now juggling across editors, trying to run multiple of these autonomous agents in the background. And then eventually at some point we do have a version of full autonomy. It's hard to say how far that is away, but let's say when we're sort of measuring agent autonomy in terms of days. This comes from a wider diagram that I do not have time to explain in this talk, but if you follow me on social media, I will do another talk where I dig into this. For the folks that are in like platform like Lena, this is our representation when we talk to customers about when they're building software development agents and the architecture. So the high level components that you need, feel free to take a picture and then you can have a think about it later. But these are the different bits and pieces that fundamentally that we will need to build internally in companies if we're trying to build out agents that actually can iterate on software. Cool, so moving on to context and memory. So this is a stolen slide from Anthropic, but like I say, models are only as good as the context we provide to them. So we need to provide context in order for them to be successful. I have another video here that I'm going to show you that relates to the first one that I showed you, but it's much shorter and actually the resolution is much better. So the tool that I showed you, Klein, also has this feature which is called Memory Bank. And what this does is essentially recursively goes through your code base and documents your code base for the AI. So the reason it does that, if you have millions of lines of code base, then the AI doesn't know which directories to step into, this kind of thing. So what it does is it goes through your entire code base, adds small README files, kind of like a good developer would do, and it uses that to effectively pick out which subcomponents do I use, which sort of directories do I step into, and then make edits on. This is effectively RAG. We talked about RAG earlier on in the conference, but for software. You can run that, creates that, and essentially this is the AI or the LLM being able to talk to itself. Here we see this, it runs over about 2 minutes, it runs through the entire code base autonomously and goes through the entire directory structure and documents. It's kind of like if you give an unfortunate junior the task of like, go through our entire code base and write a README for everything, which we sometimes ask them to do when they join. A lot of people often say that AI doesn't work for them on their code base, and this is when I come back to the patience and sort of being more ambitious. These tools exist and you should play about with them, because you can't just set up like Copilot, paste it a piece of code and expect it to understand lots of stuff. There's things like this that can drastically improve the performance. And that pull request is actually on our open source repo, so you can go and have a look at it if you want. You can see the output of what that sort of context generation actually did. Pull request 20,632 if you want to go and dig it out. There's a couple slides in here where I just don't have time to go into the details of. One of them is memory. We mentioned it and touched on it a little bit before, but as we have agents, we need them to learn. Just like if we are building the sort of context within junior developers and training them, we need them to remember things so that the next time they do a job, when we give them feedback, they don't do the same thing again. They go and break your design pattern, or they forget to write unit tests, and we say, hey, come on, keep the coverage up. They will learn this, and the next time they can adopt this. This is now going on. There's lots of different rabbit holes we could go down about memory, but this is also one thing that's also improving the success of agents in general. Tool use. So I'm going to steal a demo actually here from a workshop from Anthropic, where I'm going to show you MCP. By show of hands, like how many people has like been drowned in MCP stuff on social media? Only 1, 2, 3, yeah. I'll show you what MCP does, and then I'll explain what it is, because I think that is the best order to do it. because everyone online is talking about what MCP does, and it's easier to see the benefit of it first before understanding what it does. Sorry, 1 second. I can actually show you in here, it's probably easier. Bear with me 1 second, sorry. So MCP basically gives access to LLMs for tool use. MCP is a sort of client-server architecture. You can build these so that they can access data inside your own infrastructure. What you've basically got here on the left-hand side is Claude Desktop, configured with some MCPs for Asana and also for GitHub. And if I remember correctly, what it's doing is actually just transferring issues between the two. I'm going to go back because I think that happened quite quickly. But essentially what is it doing is you can ask it questions here, like it's saying, can you retrieve these issues from GitHub? Can you move them over to Asana? And it's able to actually make requests into GitHub through MCP. Now MCP allows it basically to have access to your GitHub. It controls things like authentication and pulling data. Think about it sort of a wrapper around these sort of APIs that's AI enabled. And then what you see is when this goes on is you start to see some of those issues getting populated into Asana on the right hand side. And you can play about with this today. You can download the GitHub or the Asana MCP, plug it into Claude. You can actually plug it into Cursor, Windsurf. I think a lot of these tools now have MCP support, but there's a lot of holes. So what I would suggest is if you're interested in MCP specifically, is go have a look at this talk, specifically this one. It's about 2 hours long, explains MCP and where it's going. We've really reached a sort of critical mass with MCP now. I think there's over 1,200, probably a lot more MCP servers created for GitHub, for Amazon, for Google. Critical mass has really been achieved. So even if you don't like the MCP protocol right now, which some people are a little critical, doesn't matter. There is such a big groundswell around MCP that things will be fixed. So a quick recap of MCP. It's a client-server kind of architecture, the client being sort of alongside the LLM itself, and then the server being the thing that's reaching out to. That can be literally anything. Postgres database, your EC2 instance running in Amazon, your home lab, if you want to access your Plex server at home, anything. And what that gives access to is tools, resources, and prompts. So coming back to the agent definition, we talk about tools. This is kind of what it's alluding to. Has access to all of these different integrations. What's cool about this is now the LLM can even feed its own context. You don't need to feed it all the context. You say, go and find it. Go to my developer documentation, pull the information, go to GitHub, find your issue. If you're stuck, you've got access to this stuff. Same thing that I do as a human once you configure it. We'll jump over this one. And the final one here is evaluation and improvement. Now, I don't have any slides on this in particular. We mentioned it before, but like trying to wrestle an LLM into sort of being deterministic is exceptionally hard. I don't know if anyone is running LLMs in production, but actually operating them is really difficult. I've heard the analogy of actually working with LLMs is more like being a site reliability engineer, where you're trying to get to like almost like 5 nines of reliability, because it's really easy to get something that's a prototype that looks like it works. Getting it to production and get it to 99%, sort of responses that are correct and you're accurate and you're happy with is exceptionally hard. So, how much time do I have? Plenty of time? 5 minutes. Okay, cool. So going back to what I said before, so there are some things that stop people getting the most out of AI. I want to get a little bit practical for you, so I've given you an overview of some of the challenges of agents, hopefully kind of exposed you to some of the latest of what agents can do. But I want to kind of give you a bit of a roadmap of things that you can go home with and play around with today. On the left-hand side, I'll put sort of adopt is like chat stuff, ChatGPT, Claude, but not just like, don't just use them, but start to think about the things that I've mentioned today. Ask it questions. Try talking to it. When you give it a prompt, say, challenge me. Last night I was creating a document, literally sat in bed running Super Whisper into Claude, dictating out loud and iterating with Claude verbally. Didn't touch the keyboard. Then someone at work asked me why it spelled our company name wrong, and I was like, oh, because Super Whisper doesn't understand the Gitpod name very well. But yeah, build prompt libraries, really start to optimize your flow. But then experimental wise, start to play with these editors. You got Cursor, Windsurf. But again, so some techniques I like with this is like telling it not to write code. It's like, whoa, hold on, slow down. Just like you would with an engineer. Like, don't just start writing code. Let's make a plan. Ask me questions. If you're unclear about something that I've told you to do, clarify with me. We make a plan before we start. You can use that to create PRDs, so sort of product requirement documents, and you can feed that back into the LLM. Really clarify what you want it to do before you execute it. Don't just give it small instructions. And then finally, on the right-hand side, I put trial, and this is sort of the emergent agent stuff that I mentioned from before. So we've got Crew AI, the SDK that Gitpod also released, and I forgot to update my techniques, but we've talked a lot about techniques for optimizing AI agents anyway. My own personal AI stack. So I'll give you a couple of tools if you want. So I use Cursor a lot. I use Granola, which is a meeting notes app. Super Whisper for dictating, like actually just rather than touching it. Claude. But think about things like prototypes and PRDs. Don't just ask it to write code. It's really good at prototyping now. If you have an idea and you want to show your colleague, hey, it would be so cool if our app did this, you can build a landing page. You can build a prototype. Yeah, throw the code away. People say that AI is bad at writing code, but it's great at writing prototypes because you don't need the code. Throw it away. But also think about ways that you can get context. Some ways that I do, like I literally grabbed the AI engineer conference, 8 hours long, grabbed that, put it into Claude, and some of the challenges that you see today was me talking to Claude about the things that I saw at the conference, to ask a question. What are the biggest challenges with agents? What does that mean for our company? How might we implement them? Have conversations. I learned so much. My brain is not mush. My brain is fried from the amount of information that I'm now trying to take in. And some of the things I really want to play around with is optimizing more my raycast, snippets, prompts, using deep research for sort of researching additional things. Letter is a very cool company that's trying to solve the memory issue for agents, and Galileo for evaluations. I need to do some more research, but I also need to sleep. So if you would let me just for 2 seconds before I wrap up, is basically I'll talk to you a little bit about what Gitpod does and what we recently released because it's kind of related to this. So in short, what we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years is really solving the works on my machine issue for humans. We have a platform that you codify everything you need in order to start coding into your environments. And basically that saves large regulated companies 10 to 20% of their developer productivity. What we're now realizing and building is the fact that everything that we've done up until this point is really also laid the foundation for also autonomous software engineers. Turns out everything you need to make a developer, a human ready to code, it's the same stuff you need for an agent. Source code, dependencies, access, network, all the same stuff. Which is why we launched an SDK. We launched this a couple of weeks ago. Basically gives you access to your environments inside of Gitpod, which, as I mentioned, they have source code, they have access, they're personal to you. It's kind of like having a sandboxed version of your laptop, and you can then apply all sorts of governance and rules around that. You can run agents in it, highly secure, you can audit them, you get visibility on them. From that, essentially what you can do is you can do things like you can get the agents to draft PRs, and you can take over in a real editor. So the agent, you can wake up in the morning, get a couple of different pull requests. It's like having someone who works overnight in a different time zone. You can get it to improve your pull requests. So more than like just looks good to me, actually you can pull the code, run it, lint it, test it. And then when it makes the PR review, it reviews your code. It can do so well informed based off of all of the context that it needs. And also Dependabot can be pretty annoying. It can bump your dependencies, but it doesn't actually test anything. Now with agents, we can actually build Dependabots that really are sort of very powerful dependency migration tools. I've seen people that are trying to build this themselves. We've been building this for 6 or 7 years. We made a ton of mistakes. I would urge you probably not to try and go down this path yourself. If you don't believe me, we published an article that went pretty viral on Hacker News about why we're leaving Kubernetes. It explains in extensive detail why Kubernetes is a bad choice for development environments and why we fundamentally moved away from it for Gitpod. If you're going to go down this path and trying to build agents in-house, you're probably going to bump into pretty much every single thing that we did. So if you want to run it on your own cluster, you'll probably run into the same issues that we had running development environments on containers. I'm probably just about landing this in time, but I've probably also overwhelmed you with a lot of information there. These are some really great blog posts that I would recommend. They're just kind of about AI and what's happening, the situational awareness. We talked about AI or die, and also the stick man with the awareness is also in there as well. But have a look. There's some good content there for the weekend. But there you go.
Cool. Thank you so much, Lou. So we have some questions. Are you ready?
I don't know if I can answer all of them, but I'll try.
Yeah. So basically, you put a slide. We discuss also why maybe some people are pushing back on AI and
Sure.
stuff like that. Guess what you didn't mention?
Oh, go on, tell me.
Sorry.
Tell me.
Well, no. Someone is asking, shall we also consider the environmental impact of AI when we are using AI as engineers?
I mean, yes.
Yes.
It's the short answer to this, surely. They're not free and they're not cheap.
And in your opinion, what is the right limit that not reach out for agent usage like cursor?
Sure.
What is the right
Right
limit that?
Not sure. I'm not quite sure.
Okay, I'm gonna do another.
Come back.
AI is expensive, and so are secret leaks. How to privately and not expensively run AI tools agents?
Sure. I mean, that's the problem that we're solving basically with the agent SDK. Yeah, essentially Gitpod has built these isolated development environments. They're used by highly regulated organizations because they're highly secure and sandboxed. And like I say, they're effectively the same for agents. The agent SDKs I mentioned, there's OpenAI, there's Cloudflare, that will give you a runtime to run agents. Ours is very specific to software engineering in terms of code context and that kind of thing, whereas some of those others are more like general purpose SDKs. It's kind of like, access to compute that's optimized for an agent. But it's a problem that's being solved. Like I mentioned, some of the guardrails and some of the security is not in place yet, but we will start to see solutions.
The other question is, I also have an answer here, but I'll let you. How we will be able to realize if the code produced by such agents will be good on the long term? My answer will be, I don't. Sometimes, have you ever faced a situation where say, oh shit, this code doesn't work, and then you realize you wrote it a week before? So, but yeah. So anyway, the question is, how we will be able to realize if the code produced by such agents will be good on the long term, as you learn from failure, and which such agents we will unlearn quickly how to code. Is that a problem for you? Are we witnessing the last generation of senior software engineers?
That's very deep.
That's deep. Yeah.
My thoughts on this generally is that we can use agents to antagonistically review agent code. So I think a lot of the code that's generated now is in the editor. We're generating a lot of code, but agents can also be used to review code. They can enforce standards. You can give them prompts. You can sort of say, don't, adhere to these design patterns. If I leak a secret, tell me or even fix it. I think that's one thing when I commonly talk to people about this that they're overlooking is you can use the AI to review the AI. And we should do. We should use that as well. But I think for the foreseeable future, I 100% see human in the loop being almost for all software for now, that there will be a human review. So we do have to be careful in the sense of we can't just generate tens of thousands of lines of code that humans can't read. It's a weird duality where we want the agents to be able to run autonomously, but we also need to be able to read that as a human and understand it and trust it. I don't have a full answer for that, but I think this is what we will see. Just like we have like CI systems and things like this to automatically verify things, I think we'll have agent sort of almost like CI versions that are reviewing our code that also is written by AI, and then we're just moderating it.
A simple question. Is there something that we need to pay, let's say, attention on the consequential AI? So when someone on one team starting to using it, if this, let's say, can hurt some other team that is not doing it. Let's say you are speed up one team with some things and the other teams becomes a bottleneck, for example, in some way because you are just changing the speed because the promise is that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not something I've thought of. I would say probably one thing that's useful there is to let those teams run ahead, let them experiment, but then also try and get them to, show their workflows. So the things I've shown you today, I mean, people talk about tools, and I tried to talk about tools and techniques. I think it's really important that we show people the tools, but we show them how we're using them, the use cases. I talk to people and I say, I have a bot that is a guy that I work with because he gives great feedback. I've literally built a bot that gives me feedback like he would, and I showed him at the conference a couple of days ago, and we reviewed something as him, and I was like, do you agree with it? And he was laughing, because it basically was like saying the same stuff he would say. So, but this is a funny workflow that people don't think about, but I think we should show these workflows to each other so we can learn more. So I think let those teams run ahead, but then also, lunch and learn, share that knowledge with other teams. Maybe there is a world where this causes downstream problems for some other teams potentially, but I haven't given it much thought.
Last question. Then we need coffee, right? Do we need coffee? Yeah. Yes.
Also about the environmental impact. Are you aware of how much CO2, energy, and water is consumed when using those instruments? Is there a easy or at least a good way to measure them to use lower impact LLMs?
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for the mic. It's a good point. I think there is, it's actually analogous to the cost problem, let's say, and the ROI problem, which is that when we run these agents, we need to know the ROI. We need to know, did they actually do something good? Because they're expensive if they're just doing things that don't work. And we also need to know if they're effective. So I think actually these sort of cost visibility, the environmental impact, all fit under sort of the same umbrella. I think if I fly all the way back, and I'll talk about this some more, this is kind of this like observability pillar to the left-hand side. We need to observe, we need to understand what those agents are doing. And I think just like what you say with the environmental impact, and then as organizations, we do need guardrails on that. We need to say, what are we okay with? Just like we do with like cloud costs, like this is the cost we want to pay for this. But then you can arbitrage, I suppose, against cloud providers that align, if it is cloud or hardware, with the environmental impact. But I think we're also going to have to go at the organizational level here and also sort of lobby our own companies to actually think about the environmental impact of this as well, because this is happening and it's going to happen at pace. Companies are going to feel like they need to jump on this bandwagon. So I think it's also down to us to raise awareness for that. But it's a great point.